still remember the taste of that night, the sweetness of champagne mixing with the salt of humiliation. My name is Kitty Williams. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how my own parents destroyed my wedding, because they decided the man I loved wasn't good enough for our family. You think betrayal hurts when it comes from friends or lovers. Try hearing it from the people who raised you, the ones who taught you to say thank you, to smile in photos, to never forget where you came from. Because when my parents decided that love had a price tag, I became the bill they refused to pay. I grew up in Boston, in a home where appearances mattered more than feelings. My father, Richard Williams. I was a corporate lawyer, the kind who wore power like perfume. My mother, Linda, was the queen of charity luncheons, always dressed in pearls and smiles for the cameras. To the world, we were perfect, the family on the glossy Christmas card, behind the doors of our mansion. Though love was a transaction, I learned early that affection came with conditions. Good grades, Kitty, and Daddy will take you shopping. Smile for the guests, sweetheart, and you can stay up late. Love was something to earn, not something freely given. Maybe that's why, when I met Ethan Blake, I fell so fast it scared me. He wasn't like the men my mother paraded at galas. He didn't come from money. He didn't even own a suit the first time I brought him home. He was a plumber, quiet, kind, and honest in a way that made everyone else in my world look like they were speaking another language. We met when my apartment flooded. I was living alone in a tiny place downtown after leaving my father's firm, trying to build my own business in interior design. The water had ruined half my living room, and I was close to tears when Ethan showed up at my door, toolbox in hand, hair messy, eyes gentle. He didn't flirt. He didn't star. He just asked, "Where's the leak?" "Ma'am," and went straight to work. It sounds stupid now, but that quiet confidence was what hooked me. He didn't try to impress me, and for once in my life, I didn't feel like I had to impress anyone either. We started talking, then seeing each other, then falling into something that felt like peace. He never cared that I came from money. He cared that I worked hard, that I was trying to make something of my own. And I cared that he listened, really listened when I spoke. After a year, he proposed to me on the same pier where my father used to take me fishing as a child. It was raining. My hair was a mess, and the ring was simple, a small diamond, not even a carat. I said yes without hesitation, because for the first time, I wasn't saying yes to what looked good. I was saying yes to what felt right. My parents didn't see it that way. When I told them, my mother's first reaction wasn't happiness, it was horror. "You're marrying who?" she asked, her voice cracking like thin glass. "Ethan," I said, smiling. "He's wonderful. Mom, you'll love him." Her eyes sharpened. "A plumber, yes," I said, trying to stay calm. "He has his own business. He's hardworking, Kitty." She cut me off. "Do you have any idea what people will say, what your father will think?" As if the man I loved was a stain on their reputation. My father's reaction was worse. He didn't yell, which was somehow scarier. He just sat there, staring at me from behind his desk. "I thought I raised you to have standards," he said quietly. "Marrying into the working class, that's not a partnership. Kitty, that's charity." I remember my voice trembling as I said, "He treats me better than anyone I've ever known." My father sighed. "You're emotional. You'll outgrow this phase." I didn't outgrow it. I grew into it. The months leading up to the wedding were war disguised as civility. My parents pretended to be supportive, even offered to pay for the venue, but every conversation came with subtle sabotage. My mother insisted on controlling the guest list, the decor, even my dress. "You'll thank me later," she'd say. "We can't have you looking common." Ethan and I fought about it constantly. He didn't want to take their money. "I can pay for the wedding," he said. We don't need their help. But I kept thinking maybe this was the bridge. Maybe if we let them be part of it, they'd finally accept him. God, how naive I was. The night before the wedding, I found my mother in the hotel ballroom, speaking quietly with the event coordinator. When she saw me, her face went pale. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I could ask you the same," I said. She glanced at the clipboard in her hand, trying to hide it. But I caught a glimpse, a list with names crossed out. Ethan's family, his friends, his coworkers. "Mom," I whispered. "What did you do?" She smiled tightly. "You'll thank me one day. You're marrying beneath yourself. The fewer people there to witness that mistake, the better." I felt like the floor vanished beneath me. She didn't even deny it. She was proud. I wanted to scream. But she walked away as if she'd just tidied a room. Not ruined my life. The next morning, my wedding day, I woke up with my heart racing. My phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls. Messages. Then one from Ethan. "We need to talk." When I reached him, he was standing outside the chapel, pale and trembling. In his hand was a folded letter. "It's from your father," he said quietly. "It was slipped under my door this morning." I took it, unfolded it, and felt my world collapse. "Mr. Blake, I appreciate your interest in my daughter, but I cannot in good conscience allow this wedding to continue. She has been raised in a world you will never understand. If you truly love her, you will let her go for her sake. Not yours." Ethan's voice broke when he said, "He's right. Kitty, I can't give you what they can. I don't want you to choose between us." I grabbed his hands. "I already chose you," but his eyes were filled with something worse than anger-pity. "Your family will never stop punishing you for loving me," he said, "and I can't stand by and watch them destroy you." Before I could say another word, he turned and walked away. He ran after him, barefoot, the sound of my dress tearing against the gravel. People were watching, guests, reporters, my parents, everyone witnessing my humiliation like it was theater. My mother didn't even look surprised. She just sipped her champagne and said to her friends, "Well, at least she's finally come to her senses." That was the moment I stopped being their daughter. I disappeared that night. I didn't go home. I didn't answer calls. I drove until the city lights were nothing but a memory behind me. For 2 days, I stayed in a roadside motel. Numb, hollow, sleepless, and on the third morning, something inside me shifted. Grief turned into something else, something sharper, something that finally felt like power. Because if they wanted to destroy my life, I was going to build a better one right in front of their eyes. Not out of spite, out of survival. They thought I'd disappear quietly, that I'd crumble without their approval. But they had no idea that the daughter they raised to never give up had just found her reason to fight. When Ethan left, I thought the pain would destroy me. But pain has a strange way of sharpening the edges of who you really are. For days, I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I replayed every moment of our relationship, the way he laughed, the way he kissed my forehead when I was anxious, the way he whispered that love wasn't about wealth. It was about loyalty. And then I'd hear my mother's voice echoing in my head, "You'll thank me later." But I didn't thank her. I cursed her. And in that curse, I found something stronger than sorrow purpose. The morning after the wedding that never was, I looked at myself in the mirror of that motel bathroom. Mascara streaked down my face. My hair was tangled, and my wedding dress, once white and glowing, lay crumpled on the floor like a ghost of the life I'd lost. But beneath the ruin, something inside me was awake. Raw, quiet, alive. I packed the dress into a box, sealed it with duct tape, and scribbled on top, "For the woman I'll never be again." Then I left Boston. No note, no forwarding address, no trace. I drove south with nothing but 2 suitcases and the money I had left from my savings account, I didn't have a plan, just a feeling that if I stayed, I'd drown under the weight of their expectations. I ended up in Savannah, Georgia, a place where the air smelled like salt and magnolia, and strangers smiled, without asking who your father was. I found a small apartment above a florist's shop, the kind of place where the paint peeled, but the light was warm. I took the first job I could find assisting in a home renovation company. It was ironic. Really. I'd gone from designing penthouses in Boston to sanding old cabinets in the South. But every scrape of the sandpaper, every brush of paint, felt like rebuilding not just furniture but myself. For the first time, my hands were dirty. My back ached. And my work wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. Months passed. The ache dulled, replaced by something else. Clarity. I stopped wondering if Ethan regretted leaving. I stopped stalking the news for glimpses of my parents at galas. I focused on my work, my clients, my independence. And then one afternoon, everything changed again. I was helping an elderly couple restore their porch when a familiar voice called from behind me. Kitty Williams. My heart stopped. I turned around and there he was. Ethan. He looked different, leaner. A little older. But those same kind eyes. He smiled. Unsure. Almost apologetics. I didn't know you were here, he said softly. I laughed, a short, breathless sound. Neither did I. We stood there, awkward and quiet, with the scent of sawdust between us. How have you been? He asked. Alive, I said. He nodded slowly. You look stronger. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would make him regret ever walking away, but I couldn't, because I saw it then. In his eyes, regret. Real. Quiet. Aching regret. He told me he'd opened a plumbing company nearby, started hiring local workers, and built something he was proud of. I heard what your parents did. He said, I'm sorry. Kittu. I thought leaving was protecting you. You broke me, I said quietly, but maybe that's what I needed. We didn't touch. We didn't cry. We just stood there, breathing the same air, both haunted by what could have been. When he left that day, I knew something, our story wasn't over. Not yet. A few months later, Savannah's Coastal Home and Living magazine ran a feature on local entrepreneurs. My renovation company, the one I had worked my way up to co-own, was on the cover. The headline read, From Designer to Builder, the Boston heiress who chose sawdust over silk. It went viral. People loved the idea of a rich girl gone rogue, a woman who left privilege for purpose. What I didn't realize was that Boston loved it too, especially my parents' social circle. Within a week, I started getting calls from unknown numbers, emails, messages, then one from my mother. We're proud of you. Darling. The article was beautiful. Maybe it's time you came home. Home. The word hit me like a slap. The same woman who'd destroyed my wedding now wanted to celebrate my success because strangers approved of it. She didn't see my pain, only her reflection in my publicity. I didn't reply. Instead, I took that magazine article and pinned it to my wall. Not as an accomplishment, but as a reminder. Success is the loudest silence you can give to people who never believed in you. But karma, I learned, doesn't like unfinished stories. A year later, I got an invitation in the mail. Gold lettering. Expensive paper. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Williams request the honor of your presence at their 35th anniversary gala. I almost laughed. It wasn't about family. It was about reputation. They wanted me back for show the prodigal daughter who made good. For a week, I stared at that invitation. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going as their daughter. I was going as the woman they tried to erase. I arrived at the hotel in Savannah where they were hosting the event, the same hotel where they had once humiliated me on my wedding day. Only this time, I wasn't the broken girl in white. I walked in wearing a deep emerald gown, hair swept back, confidence like armor. Cameras flashed as I entered. People whispered. And then I saw them, my parents smiling for the crowd. Radiant and fake as ever. My mother's expression faltered when she saw me. My father's eyes narrowed. A mix of surprise and discomfort. "Kitty." My mother breathed, clutching her pearls. "You came." "I did," I said calmly. "You invited me. Remember." Her smile wavered. "We weren't sure if I'd show my face after you tried to ruin my life," I said softly enough that only she could hear. Her face went pale. "Must you always dramatize?" "No." "Mother," I whispered. "You're the one who turned my love story into theater. I'm just here for the final act." Before she could answer, a photographer called out, "Miss Williams, can we get a picture with your parents?" I turned toward the camera and smiled, not for them, but for myself, because that photo wasn't about family unity. It was about reclamation. I stood between the two people who had once broken me and smiled like someone who no longer needed their approval. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerful, but I wasn't done yet. Because the true revenge hadn't even begun. The air inside that ballroom was so thick with perfume and pretense that it almost choked me. The chandeliers shimmered like a crown over a kingdom of lies. I smiled for the photographers. Shook hands. Accepted compliments, all while my pulse thrummed with quiet defiance. This wasn't reconciliation. This was reclamation. And yet, beneath the glitz, I could sense the same poison as before: the shallow conversations, the performative laughter, the subtle arrogance of people who measured worth in inheritance and social standing. My parents thrived in this atmosphere. But for once, I wasn't there to fit in. I was there to remind them that I had survived without them. After the initial greetings, I slipped away from the crowd and made my way toward the bar. I needed air, distance, and the taste of freedom on my tongue. As I reached for a glass of champagne, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Didn't expect to see you back here." I turned. Ethan stood there, wearing a charcoal suit, looking far too composed for a man who'd once walked out of my life in a storm. My breath caught. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He gave a small smile. "Your father hired my company. The hotel had a major pipe issue last month. They liked my work. So they invited me tonight, said it was a chance to network. And free." I almost laughed at the irony. My parents had unknowingly invited the same man they once deemed unworthy. He studied me for a moment. "You look powerful," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "Steady. I am." The night unfolded in a haze of forced smiles and whispered gossip. My mother paraded her charm like a weapon, introducing me to everyone as our successful daughter, the designer from Savannah. She didn't mention the years of silence, the wreckage she'd caused, or the wedding that never happened. To her, history was only what looked good in conversation. But karma has a way of slipping into the room when pride stands too tall. Halfway through the evening, the hotel manager approached the microphone to thank the guests and showcase a surprise presentation in honor of the Williams family's decades of community service. "We've prepared a short video." The lights dimmed. Screens flickered to life. I braced myself for another vanity piece: childhood photos. Philanthropic highlights, the kind of staged nostalgia my parents adored. But as the images rolled, I realized something was wrong. The video wasn't theirs. It started with clips of me, my projects, my interviews, my work in Savannah. The voiceover described the story of a woman who had rebuilt her life after losing everything, who turned pain into strength, who redefined legacy without privilege. The audience murmured. Cameras flashed. I could feel my mother's stare burning through me. Then the screen cut to a photo I'd never seen, a still frame from my canceled wedding. Me in my torn dress, standing barefoot outside the chapel, staring at Ethan as he walked away. The caption beneath read, "Before success, there was survival." The crowd gasped. My father's face went white. My mother's lips parted in horror. I stood frozen, My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned toward Ethan. His expression was unreadable. When the video ended, the room erupted in whispers. Someone had clearly hacked the presentation, but whoever did it, they knew exactly what they were doing. My mother rose to her feet, trembling with fury. "Turn that off now," the manager stammered. I don't know how this. I stepped forward. Calm. Almost eerily so. "It's fine," I said. "Let them finish." Because in that moment, I realized something: that video wasn't my humiliation. It was my liberation, playing on every screen for the world to see. My father tried to recover his composure, forcing a laugh. "Some technical error," he said stiffly. "Clearly. Someone's idea of a joke." But the crowd wasn't laughing. They were staring at me, at the woman in the story, not the daughter in their narrative. When the lights came back on, I felt the shift. For years, they'd defined who I was: the naive girl, the disgrace, the disappointment. Now, everyone saw the truth: that I had built something on my own. Ethan met my eyes across the room. His expression softened, pride flickering there. "Was that you?" I mouthed. He shook his head, then tilted his chin toward the corner, where one of my old friends, a journalist from Savannah, stood with a small, guilty smile. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. My mother's voice sliced through the noise. "We need to talk," she hissed. Grabbing my arm, she pulled me into the hallway, away from the crowd. Her mask finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've embarrassed us." I pulled my arm free. "You embarrassed yourself the day you decided my happiness wasn't good enough for you. You're delusional," she snapped. "You've always been dramatic, always trying to make yourself a victim." "No, Mother," I said softly. "You made me one, and I turned it into strength." Her mouth trembled, but no words came out. Years of control, manipulation, and guilt collapsed under the weight of her own reflection. I didn't wait for her reply. I turned and walked back into the ballroom, the sound of whispers following me like music. Ethan was still there, watching. When I reached him, he said, "That was something." I smiled faintly. Maybe karma just RSVP'd. It chuckled quietly. "You always did have perfect timing." We talked for a while, away from the noise, not as broken lovers, but as two people who had survived the same storm and come out clean on the other side. Before the night ended, my father approached us. His face was pale, his voice low. "Kittu," he said. "Whatever that video was, you handled it professionally. I didn't expect that." I looked at him, decades of buried emotion pressing against my chest. "You never expected me to handle anything, Dad. That's why you lost me." He didn't argue. For the first time, he just looked at me, really looked. "Your mother and I, we were wrong," he said finally. "I can see that now." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest thing I'd ever get. After the gala, I drove back to my hotel, exhausted but strangely weightless. Savannah's night air felt softer, sweeter. I looked at myself in the mirror. No pearls, no mask, no performance, and whispered, "You did it." The next morning, I woke to hundreds of messages. The video had spread online. People were calling it "the daughter who walked away." It became a story of empowerment, of self-worth, of walking out of a gilded cage. And maybe that's what my life had always been, a cage I'd mistaken for safety. That night, I received one last message. It was from Ethan. "Coffee tomorrow, no expectations. Just two people who finally learned who they are." I smiled. Maybe karma doesn't just punish. Maybe it also heals. I met Ethan the next morning at a small cafe near the river. The sunlight spilled across the tables, glinting off the glass windows. And for a moment, I wondered how many mornings I had wasted chasing the wrong kind of love. He was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with 2 cups of coffee waiting. No flowers. No grand gestures. Just him, simple, steady, familiar. When I sat down, he smiled, that quiet smile that used to melt all my defenses. "Still take it with 1 sugar?" he asked. I laughed softly. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said. For a while, we didn't talk. We just sat there. 2 people bound by a history that had once broken us both. The river shimmered behind him, and I thought about how strange life was, how the same water that once drowned you could someday feel like peace. Finally, he spoke. "I saw the video everywhere last night. You handled it with grace. I don't know if I could have done the same." I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into gold. I didn't plan it, but maybe it was time people saw the truth. He nodded. "Your parents won't recover easily from that." "Good," I said without hesitation. "They built their empire on appearances. Maybe now they'll learn what authenticity looks like." Ethan chuckled, then grew quiet. "Do you ever think about what could have been if that day had gone differently?" "Every day," I admitted, "but I've stopped wishing it had. If you hadn't walked away, I never would have found out who I was without them." He lowered his gaze, guilt flickering behind his eyes. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know," I said softly, "but the truth is, you protected me the wrong way. I didn't need saving from my parents. I needed someone who would stand beside me when they tried to tear us down." He looked up, pain and pride warring in his expression. "And now, I said, "I don't need anyone to stand beside me. I've learned how to stand alone." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both regret and respect. "You've become everything I always believed you could be." I finished my coffee and stood. "And you've become what they never thought you'd be." He laughed quietly. "Guess we both proved someone wrong." As I left the cafe, I realized closure isn't always about rekindling what's lost. Sometimes it's about walking away one last time, but without anger in your heart. That morning, I didn't look back. I didn't have to. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail handwritten. Elegant. Familiar. My mother's handwriting. For a long time, I debated whether to open it. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, to let her words rot in the silence she had created. But curiosity, or maybe compassion, won. Inside, there was no apology. Not at first. Just her neat, practice sentences. "Your father and I have been reflecting on everything that's happened. We didn't raise you to turn your back on family. But perhaps we made you believe family was something it wasn't. I saw the video. I saw your strength. I didn't recognize the woman you've become. And that's my fault." Then, a pause in the ink, as if her pen had trembled. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to say, you were right. Love can't be bought. And I'm sorry it took losing you to learn that." I read it twice, tears blurring the words. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I'd ever needed. But it was something, a crack in the armor she had worn all her life. I didn't write back. Some wounds don't need closure to heal. They just need peace. Over time, my life in Savannah flourished. My renovation company expanded, partnering with local craftsmen and small business owners, people like Ethan. People who worked with their hands and their hearts. We turned abandoned houses into homes, broken spaces into beauty. I started giving talks at women's conferences about independence, forgiveness, rebuilding your life after betrayal. The first time I stood on stage and said the words, "My parents disowned me because I fell in love with a plumber," the audience gasped, but then they clapped. Because behind every polished smile in that crowd was someone who had been told they weren't enough. And for the first time, I realized my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who had been dismissed. Every daughter who had been belittled. Every person who had been told their love wasn't worthy. I was no longer the victim of my parents' arrogance. I was the author of my own redemption. 2 years later, I returned to Boston not for them, but for myself. I stood outside the house I'd grown up in. The manicured hedges, the marble porch, the gleaming door. All of it looked smaller now, like a museum of illusions. My father had retired. My mother's social circle had shrunk after the scandal. Time had humbled them in ways pride never could. Through the window, I saw my mother sitting alone at the dining table. Her posture still perfect, but her face softer, older, almost fragile. She didn't see me, and I didn't knock. Instead, I placed a single envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a photo me standing on the porch of a renovated home, surrounded by my team. On the back, I had written, "You taught me how to build a beautiful life. I just had to learn to build it my way." Then I walked away. Back in Savannah, my company hosted a charity event for local single mothers, women rebuilding their lives after divorce, loss, or family rejection. As I stood on stage, looking out at the sea of faces, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I told them, "We can't choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the one we build. The people who stand by us, who lift us, who believe in our worth, that's family." After the applause faded, I stepped outside for air. The night was warm, the sky full of stars, and for the first time in years, I felt something deep, unshakable peace. Ethan was there too, leaning against his truck. He had come to support the event. He smiled when he saw me. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," I corrected, smiling back. We talked for a while about work, life, and the strange paths that had brought us both here. There was no romance left between us. Not the kind that burns and consumes, but there was something purer respect. Maybe even love, in its truest, quietest form. Before he left, he said, "You know, Kitty, I used to think your story ended the day I walked away from that chapel, but now I see it was just beginning." I nodded, tears glistening in my eyes. Maybe that's the point of heartbreak. It forces us to build better beginnings. Now, when I look back, I don't see the girl who was humiliated at her wedding. I see the woman who turned humiliation into triumph. I see the strength born from rejection, the beauty that grew out of pain, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that karma has its own perfect timing. My parents taught me about pride. Ethan taught me about love. But life taught me about power. The power of forgiveness. The power of walking away. The power of becoming everything they said I couldn't be. So, if you're listening to this and you've ever been betrayed, belittled, or broken by the people who were supposed to love you most, listen carefully. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their approval to rise. You only need your own permission to begin again. Because sometimes, the most beautiful revenge is living a life so whole, so peaceful, so radiant, that even your pain bows down to it.